So ultraviolet B rays will cause sunburn. They peak in the summer and in North America. They drop down in the winter. And those are what we typically think of. I'm going out in the sun, it's going to be hot, I better put on sunscreen because you want to avoid a burn. And you can see that ultraviolet B causes sunburn, but ultraviolet A rays, those ones that go deeper, are how people tan. Now the tricky thing, I'll get to that in a minute here. So here's some beautiful pictures. So we typically said that UVB rays cause skin cancer, but what do UVA rays do? Those are the ones that go down deeper. They cause brown spots, they cause wrinkling, and they are being associated more strongly with basal cell squamous cell and with melanoma also. So here's a lady who she probably wore sunscreen, I would think, but the interesting thing is that she has lots and lots of brown speckles and freckles and marks on her skin. You can also see the wrinkles she has, so the brown and the wrinkles, that's the effect of the UVA more. And here's someone, the tan you don't see in the mirror. So this is a fellow, the little picture up at the top is what he looks like to our naked eye. And when you use a black light, you can see that he actually has extensive sun damage that isn't showing to in visible light, but it is showing with the black light. And all of that is caused, most of that is caused from UVA. And here's another person with visible light and with a black light. And you can see speckle, lots of extensive sun damage. So what happens when the sun damage, what happens with the sun damage is that with time, enough UVA and UVB will actually cause our DNA cells, the DNA to break, shift, reconnect, and that's how the skin cancers can begin. It takes a lot of UV damage for these changes to occur, and so there's a delayed effect from the sun exposure to your skin cancer. A skin cancer may show up 10, 20, 30 years after you've had the onslaught of sun exposure. A lot of people will come in and I'll say, you have a little skin cancer. I never go out in the sun. It's like, well, what did you do when you were a kid? Well, you know, we were at Tahoe. Oh, yeah, so the lifeguard at Tahoe, right? So that's like the recipe for bad skin. Okay, so here we are, ultraviolet B. Sunburn, these are the wavelengths of ultraviolet B, 290 to 320 nanometers. So this affects the very top layer of the skin, remember, right up at the top, and that has a direct association with skin cancers. It's stronger in the summer. It is blocked by windows, so ultraviolet B rays don't come through windows. And when you see an SPF number on the sunscreen, that's the sun protection factor, and that is protection against UVB only. That SPF doesn't tell you anything about UVA sunscreen protection. So ultraviolet A, so what's happening here? We are at high altitude. You can see from the picture, it looks probably winteroid. And it's bright, but the sun isn't super bright there. So UVA, 320 to 400 nanometers, that penetrates deeper into the skin, not as directly associated with skin cancer, yet it is related. And this is constant year-round. If you remember one thing tonight, it's that UVA rays are constant year-round. It doesn't have to be warm for you to get UVA damage. And when they see put on sunscreen year-round, you think, yeah, right, you really should be putting on sunscreen every time you're going to be outside in the sun. Now, it does pass through windows, so people who drive in a car a lot with the window rolled up, they can still have more sun damage on the left side of their face. Office workers who sit near a window, the side of their body that's near the window can have more ultraviolet damage. Remember, it's slow, but over time it just starts to creep up and accumulate. So when you look for sunscreen to protect against UVA, you want to look for something that says full spectrum or broad spectrum. So again, it's not how high the SPF number it is, it's something that says full spectrum or broad spectrum, and that will give your UVA coverage. So risk factors for skin cancer, another one, fair skin, light hair, and light eyes, light blue, light green. And I think some of us remember this little girl there. So Dr. Fitzpatrick arranged skin into 5 different skin types. And the more fair the skin type, the more likely these people are to be more easily sun damaged and have higher risk for skin cancer. So type 1 you can see here, red hair, super fair skin, they'll have light green, light blue eyes. And type 1 skin, patients with people with type 1 skin, when they go out in the sun 15 minutes, 30 minutes, they always burn, they never tan, And so that's type 1 skin. Type 2 skin will burn and mostly burn, and then they might get a little bit of tan, but it's usually kind of a brown-red tan. So when you press the skin, when you press the skin will blanch because it's red, so it's red and brown. That isn't like a great tan, so if there is such a thing. So that's type 2 skin. They do tan a bit, but they still burn. Type 3 skin will, the first time out in the summer, they'll burn a bit and then they'll tan. Type 4 skin rarely burns and usually tans, and type 5 skin never burns and always tans. So people with type 1, 2, and 3 skin are more likely to develop skin cancers. And so here's another picture of the different skin types, and we've broken 5 down into 5 to 6 here, but you can get the same idea. So type 1 and 2 super fair, 3 is more on the fair side, 4 usually tans, 5 and 6 very rarely burn, and they almost always tan. So tan, but people say I need to go out and get a tan before I go to Hawaii so I don't get burned and I protect my skin. What is a tan? A tan is basically the body's response to injury. So when the sunlight hits the skin, the melanocyte, which is that little cell down in the bottom that says, oh my gosh, we're getting damaged, we have to make more pigment to protect us. So they start making these little pigment granules that spread out. But basically, it's sort of like a Band-Aid. The body's trying to put Band-Aids on their skin, but these are tan Band-Aids, trying to protect their skin from sun damage. So when you're getting a tan to protect yourself when you go to Hawaii, you're really damaging your skin so that you can damage your skin later, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. So here we have, these are the Fitzpatrick type 1 and 2 people again. Red hair, blonde hair, fair skin, blue eyes, light green eyes. These are the people who you really have to protect from the sun. Okay, tanning beds. What is so bad about tanning beds? But the deal with tanning beds, it's sort of like a microwave compared to an oven, or the convection. So basically it's a very concentrated bolus of ultraviolet damage on your skin in a limited period of time. So going out to get a tan is damaging to your skin. Getting in a tanning bed is vastly more damaging to your skin. So the UVA is the majority of the wavelengths that people get in a tanning bed, but there is a little bit of UVB, and remember the UVB directly causes skin cancer, but UVA can also. So it's not a good idea to expose yourself to more damage than you need. I don't know, there was a law that I think Jerry Brown, January this year, passed that children under 18 cannot use the tanning bed before they needed parents' permission. So basically, what a tanning bed does, it increases your risk for skin cancer. Even a couple times in the tanning bed can increase your risk, even if it were 10 or 20 years ago. So here you can see, if people thought of it, this pick your cancer, they might think a little bit differently before they climbed in. But you know what, I think it's mostly information, so. Okay, so family history, I won't go into this too much, but the reason the family history is important is you do inherit your parents' skin type. The other thing is you inherit your parents' vacation style. So if your family had a boat and you water skied a lot, you're going to do that too, and you're going to have more sun exposure. And then I won't go into the genetic part here, but it is interesting that if a person's had a melanoma, they are also at risk they should have their eyes examined to make sure they don't have an ocular melanoma, and there is an association with pancreatic and breast cancer. So in Australia, they're brilliant. The people in Australia do not recommend sunscreen as their first line of defense against the sun. They recommend sun protection. So they say slip, slap, slop. I don't know if you're slipping on a hat or slapping on a hat, but they recommend fabric, they recommend shade structures rather than just using sunscreen to protect, because it's a more even and more definable amount of sun protection. And you can best to avoid the sun between 10 and 4 in the morning, 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. Sunglasses are good, and then you should reapply sunscreen every 2 to 3 hours. One recent study I was reading about skiers, they would say, do you put on sunscreen before you go skiing? Oh, yes, I do. Do you reapply? And hardly anybody reapplies at lunch. You're kind of like, oh, I'll just do a few more runs, it's okay. So the reapplication is really important, especially if you're sweating or the wind's blowing or you've been swimming, something like that. Okay, so let's see here. There's going to be there's supposed to be a new sunscreen recommendation of no higher than 50 because there's sort of sunscreen inflation. SPF 100 isn't better than SPF 30. It's just thick, 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 thick. So the FDA is trying to limit it, to restrict it to no higher than 50, and above that it'll say 50 plus. But again, what's important is the full spectrum sunscreen. So I recommend a sunscreen at SPF 30 or 30 to 50, and it says UVA, UVB protection. And again, remember, clothing is going to protect you more than sunscreen. So here's 3 chaps who, it looks like they probably just had their shirt on and they didn't put sunscreen on, and probably the color of their shirt. Anyway, they got burned. Message of this is you can get burned through your clothing, even though you wouldn't think so. So depends on the weave of the clothing. If you wear a t-shirt, you're getting about an SPF of 3 to 5 with your white t-shirt. Darker colored clothes help to protect you. More tightly woven clothing helps to protect also from the sun. There's a product called Sun Guard, and it was made by RIT. I don't know who it's made by now, but it looks like little RIT fabric dye things. But you add that to your wash, and it gives your clothes SPF for up to 20 washes. So if you have some favorite shirts that you want to keep wearing, but you're worried they may not protect enough, buy the Sun Guard, use that all year, you'll be good. And then there's several sun protective clothing sites that they make wonderful clothing that really protects, and you don't have to worry if you have enough sunscreen, you can just throw your shirt on and off you go. All right, so UV index, you may have seen this in the paper, the newspaper, they list this of when you should go out or not. And again, it'd be just a good idea if you could make a note of that, because you can sort of start to train your eyes. If it's sort of bright out, oh yes, the UV index says it's an 8 or a 9, I should really stay in. And sometimes you'll be surprised that it doesn't seem that bright out, but the UVA index will be high. And again, that's because with cloud cover, you can still get a lot of sun coming through the clouds. So a lot of people say, I need vitamin D, I get vitamin D from the sun, so I'm gonna go out and keep getting sun exposure. But actually, the amount of vitamin D that you get when you're in the sun varies, and it varies based on the time of year it is. It varies based on how far a person lives from the equator. It varies on the time of day. It varies with the cloud cover and the weather. It varies with a person's skin tone or color. It varies with a person's age. So there's so many factors that you just don't know how much vitamin D you're getting when you're sitting outside, that it's better to avoid the injury and take your supplement. So this is about one of the few vitamins I recommend taking a supplement. All right, so thank you, and I hope that I was able to help prevent some skin cancer.